Title: The Demon Who Lived Under My Bed. You won't want to sleep tonight after this one. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like if you're brave enough, and share this with someone who loves true horror stories. Trust me, you won't want to be alone after hearing this. In '93, the Martinez family moved into a large, seemingly ordinary home in the quiet suburbs of Los Angeles. The house was perfect, or so it seemed. It was spacious, old, with a large backyard and a quiet street. To the outside world, it was the picture of suburban life, a dream home. But for 12-year-old Michael, it became his worst nightmare. At first, the strange happenings were small things being slightly out of place, shadows that moved too quickly, a cold spot in the hallway. But as the days passed, it escalated. It started with the whispers. Michael would wake up in the middle of the night to hear soft murmurs coming from beneath his bed. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, the typical creaks and groans of an old house settling. But these whispers were different. They weren't just sounds, they were words. Distinct, coherent words that seemed to come from deep within the floorboards. Michael. It was a voice that seemed to call his name, but it wasn't familiar. It wasn't friendly. He'd sit up in bed, heart racing, staring at the dark outline of the floor beneath him, too terrified to move. One night, unable to take it any longer, Michael climbed out of bed and knelt beside the floor. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. He could almost make out what they were saying. "Come closer." A sharp gasp cut through the silence. His mother, Maria, had entered the room, her face pale and stricken with fear. She had heard the whispers too. "Michael, are you hearing that?" she asked, her voice shaking. Michael nodded, terrified that someone else might be hearing them too. Maria tried to comfort him, telling him it was just the house settling. But something in her eyes told him she wasn't convinced. The next morning, Michael's father, Hector, came home early from work. He was surprised to find his wife and son huddled in the living room, an air of unease hanging thick in the air. Hector immediately sensed something was wrong. Maria explained what had been happening, the whispers, the cold spots, the feeling that something was watching them. Hector dismissed it at first, attributing it to stress from the recent move. But as night fell and the house grew quiet, he began to feel it too. At 2 a.m., he heard it the soft scratching sound, followed by the unmistakable whispers. This time, Hector didn't hesitate. He stormed upstairs to Michael's room, determined to prove that it was just their imagination. He knelt down beside the bed, leaning over to peer beneath it. Nothing. But then, as he stood up, the whispers grew louder, closer. He turned, and for a split second, he saw something dark, almost humanoid, crouching in the corner of the room. It was so fleeting, so fast, that Hector wasn't sure if he had imagined it. But the feeling it left behind was unmistakable, a cold dread that clung to him. The next day, they contacted a local priest, Father Dominic, who had experience with cases of possession and hauntings. When he arrived, he listened carefully to their story, and his expression turned grave. "This house, it holds more than just memories," he said quietly. "There are darker things here." Father Dominic agreed to perform a cleansing of the house. As he entered Michael's room, he placed a small cross on the floor, his prayers barely audible over the thick tension that hung in the room. Suddenly, the room grew cold. The floor creaked beneath them, as if something heavy had moved underneath. And then the whispers, louder than ever. They were no longer coming from beneath the bed, but from within the walls. "Go away," the voice hissed, clear and sharp. "You will never leave." Father Dominic's face tightened. He whispered a final prayer, and as the room fell silent, he looked at the family, his eyes wide with fear. This house was built on land where ancient rituals were performed, dark rituals. The spirit you are dealing with is no mere ghost, but a demon that has been bound to this house for decades. But the demon wasn't finished. That night, as the family tried to sleep, Michael heard something that made his blood run cold. The whispers were back. But this time they were different. They weren't trying to coax him to come closer. They were angry. He heard it in the same voice. It was speaking now, not to him, but to his father. "Hector, you can't escape. I'll find you." Michael ran into his parents' room, but his father wasn't there. The bed was empty. Terrified, he searched the house, calling for his father, but there was no answer. Then he heard a heavy thud from the basement, and the unmistakable sound of someone scratching on the floor. He knew what he had to do. He had to find his father before it was too late. Michael grabbed a flashlight and ran to the basement, calling for Hector. As he opened the door to the dark, damp cellar, the whispers grew louder, and he felt the unmistakable presence of something standing behind him. He froze, too terrified to turn around. But then he heard the unmistakable sound of someone laughing in the darkness. Michael stood frozen at the door to the basement, his heart hammering in his chest. The sound of laughter echoed from the darkness, hollow and mocking. He gripped the flashlight tighter, his hands shaking as the light flickered. No, this wasn't real. This wasn't happening. But the laughter didn't stop. It was a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate the very air around him. As he forced himself to take a step forward, the light cast long, twisted shadows on the basement walls. The old wooden stairs creaked beneath his feet, each step feeling like an eternity. When he reached the bottom, he swept the beam of his flashlight across the room. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of rot clung to the corners. And there, at the farthest edge of the basement, was the shadow. It wasn't like anything he'd ever seen before. It was tall, much taller than any person should have been, and it seemed to twist and bend unnaturally as it moved. Its limbs stretched out in a way that defied logic, as though it didn't belong to the rules of the human body. Michael's breath caught in his throat. The shadow slowly straightened, its face becoming visible in the dim light. It had no features, only a blank void where eyes should have been, but deep black holes that seemed to suck in the light around it. "You should have stayed away." The voice came from behind him in a whisper that was more like a hiss. Michael spun around, but no one was there. He turned back to the basement, and the figure was gone. But the darkness remained. It pressed in on him, suffocating, as if it were alive. And it wanted him. Suddenly, Michael felt a sharp, icy breath on his neck. He spun again, but this time he wasn't alone. The figure was right behind him, towering over him, its skeletal fingers brushing his skin as it whispered, "You're mine now." At that moment, Michael did the only thing he could then. He bolted. He ran up the stairs, his feet slipping on the rickety steps, but when he reached the door, it slammed shut in his face with a deafening bang. Panic set in. He couldn't escape. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls moving ever closer. The floor beneath his feet felt like it was shaking. He pounded on the door, screaming for his parents, but the house was silent, dead silent. Upstairs, Maria and Hector were already awake. They'd heard the noise. They knew their son was in danger. But when they opened the door to his room, it was empty. The bed was still made, the curtains drawn tightly shut. There was no sign of Michael. "Michael!" Maria cried, rushing through the house, opening every door, every closet. But the house was still too still. That's when they noticed it. The sound of faint whispers coming from the walls. At first, it sounded like a trick of the wind, but then they realized the whispers were calling their names. Maria stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror. She turned to Hector, and he could see it in her face. This was no longer just a haunting. This was something much darker. Meanwhile, Michael was still trapped in the basement. His mind raced as he looked around, trying to find a way out. And then, in the far corner of the room, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A scratched-out symbol carved into the wall. He stumbled toward it, wiping away the dust. The symbol was ancient, a pentagram, encircled by jagged lines. At the center, there was a name written in an old blood-red script. Valor. The name sent a chill down Michael's spine. He had never heard it before, but something told him he was about to. He was not alone. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder. They weren't just coming from the walls anymore. They were coming from within his own mind, echoing in his skull. The voice of the demon, Viad, Ybor, grew clearer. You cannot escape. The temperature dropped even further. Michael could see his breath in the air, thick and visible. The shadowy figure appeared once more, but this time it was standing at the far end of the room. Its eyes, or what should have been eyes, glowed with an unsettling intensity. You belong to me now, Michael. You and your family. Michael's chest tightened. His heart pounded in his ears. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. His feet felt glued to the ground, his body locked in place. The figure stepped forward, closer, closer still, until it was towering right in front of him. And then it reached out a hand, long, clawed fingers that were cold to the touch. Michael felt his pulse quicken as the fingers brushed against his skin. The figure's grip tightened. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the house. The door to the basement burst open, and Hector appeared, a wooden bat in hand. He swung it wildly, striking the figure. But the demon didn't flinch. Instead, the bat passed right through its body. Maria appeared behind Hector, her eyes wide in shock as she saw what had become of their son. The figure turned its attention toward her, its dark eyes narrowing. Before Maria could react, the figure spoke. "I've waited long enough. You should have never come here." And then the house went silent. This is the moment the house shows its true face. If you thought this was terrifying, just wait for the ending. Hit subscribe and get ready for the nightmare to unfold. The house had gone silent. Too silent. Maria and Hector stood frozen, staring at the towering figure in front of them. Michael, once a boy full of life, now stood motionless in its grip, his face pale, eyes hollow. He wasn't Michael anymore. He was something else, something trapped in the demon's world. The demon, Valor, glared at them with eyes that burned through the dark. There was no mercy, no humanity left in the face that now smiled at them. Its grin stretched unnaturally wide, showing teeth that were sharp like razors. "You're too late," the demon whispered, its voice an unnatural echo that filled the entire room. It wasn't just speaking aloud, it was speaking inside their minds, twisting their thoughts, planting fear deep in their hearts. Maria felt her knees weaken, and she reached out to Hector, but he was already moving forward, his hands trembling as he held the bat. He swung it again, this time with all the strength he had left. But once more it passed right through the demon's form. The air around them grew even colder, as if they were sinking into an endless void. "You can't fight what has been bound to this house for centuries," Valor hissed, his voice slithering into their bones. "The ritual was completed long ago. You're mine now, all of you." Hector's eyes darted around the room, looking for anything that could help. But everything was out of reach. The walls seemed to close in, the very air pressing down on them, making it hard to breathe. Panic set in. They were trapped. Maria's eyes flicked to Michael, his body now swaying slightly, his mouth open in a silent scream. And then it happened. The floorboards beneath them creaked. A low rumbling noise echoed from the depths of the house. The foundation itself seemed to shake, and a thick, inky blackness began to rise from the floor. It wasn't a shadow, it was something alive, a mass of darkness that twisted and churned like a living entity. "It's coming for you," Valor whispered, his face twisting in a grotesque smile. "Everything here is mine. The land, the house, the souls that wander it. And now you." Maria and Hector scrambled back, but the dark mass moved toward them. They could hear scratching sounds, like claws digging into the wood. The house itself seemed to groan, as if something beneath it was alive, pulling at the earth. And then Michael's voice broke the silence. "Mom, Dad, help me." It was a desperate whisper coming from Michael's lips, but it wasn't his voice anymore. The voice was deeper, hollow, corrupted by the demon's influence. The family's hearts ached. This wasn't their son anymore. Michael was lost. The demon had him completely. Hector's breath caught in his throat. "No, we won't lose you, Michael." He rushed forward, grabbing his son's cold, limp hand, trying to pull him free. But as he touched Michael's skin, a shock of icy energy shot through him. It was like the air itself had turned into ice. His fingers went numb, and he felt himself being pulled into the darkness. Maria screamed, pulling Hector away from Michael. The dark mass had reached them now, its tendrils creeping across the floor like a tide of black ink, surrounding their feet, making it impossible to move. They were sinking. But just as they thought they were doomed, a loud crash shattered the air. The basement door burst open, and the very ground beneath them shook with force. A low, thunderous growl echoed from the depths of the house. Maria turned toward the sound. She gasped. In the doorway stood a figure Father Thomas, the priest they had contacted weeks earlier. But he was not the same man. His eyes were wide, his face pale and covered in sweat, as if he had just battled something unimaginable. "Get out of here," he shouted, his voice booming. "It's too late to fight him alone. But I can stop this." He raised his hands, and a brilliant white light emanated from his palms. The light pierced the darkness like a knife through fog, pushing the black mass back. For a moment, the demon recoiled, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. Father Thomas stepped forward, chanting in an ancient tongue, his voice shaking but resolute. The demon screamed in fury, thrashing against the light, its body twisting and warping. "No, no." Velor's voice screeched, an unnatural, guttural sound. "You cannot banish me. This is my home." But Father Thomas was not afraid. With one final, defiant shout, the light grew brighter, blinding, until the darkness began to retreat, vanishing into the walls, into the ground, and leaving behind nothing but silence. The house fell still. The temperature rose back to normal, and the heavy air seemed to lift. Michael collapsed to the floor, his body trembling, but the light in his eyes returned. The black tendrils that had surrounded him were gone. Father Thomas rushed to him. "He's free. The demon's hold is broken." But Michael's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He looked up at his parents, his voice trembling. "What happened?" Maria hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe, Michael. You're safe." Days later, the family left the house, unable to stay any longer. But the priest's warning still echoed in their minds. The land was cursed long before they ever moved in. As they drove away, the house stood in the distance, silent and still. But as they looked back, they could have sworn they saw a shadow in the upstairs window, watching them leave. If you thought this was terrifying, wait for the next story. You'll never look at your home the same way again. Hit subscribe, because some horrors never let go.